Alright guys, Willem here, back with a new video, and in this video, I'll be talking about my thoughts on the latest entry in the Assassin's Creed series for some reason, and that is Assassin's Creed Mirage. Now, I've very openly talked in the past about how much I don't care about Assassin's Creed anymore. Obviously, I was a massive fan for years, and even coming into Valhalla, I was extremely hyped for that game. And despite Mirage here being proclaimed as a return to form for the series, I simply didn't care. Or really the main reason why I ended up buying Mirage here and ended up playing it right away is because I do intend on redoing my Assassin's Creed series ranking next year, a plan I've been having for literally years. And through that, by the time I make it, Assassin's Creed Mirage will come out, and again, decide screw it, I'll buy it. I think it's already a budget title, plus also there were other discounts, and it's like, screw it, I'll buy Mirage. And here, I guess I'll be talking about my thoughts on it. And straight up, it was okay. With this game, it does seem like there are two different camps on their opinions of this game. It feels like there's this camp of old school Assassin's Creed fans, these people who have been wanting us to get back to the likes of the older games, and those sort of people seem to be really enjoying Mirage. While you have the other side of things, these newer Assassin's Creed fans are really just the general public who are more fans of the RPG games, and through that feel like this is a regression of the series. I feel neither of those things with this game. I personally find this game to be, again, better than the recent RPG games, for sure. I think that's undoubtedly better than Odyssey and Valhalla, probably better than Origins, though I'm personally much more biased towards Origins. I would even say probably better than some of the last few entries before the RPG turn. But is it old school Assassin's Creed? Not really. And to be fair, I will say that I think the developers of this game did most of what they could to try to make this old school Assassin's Creed. I do not put any of the blame on this game to the developers of the game. I mostly put a lot of the blame into Ubisoft, where I think this game is severely harmed by the fact that very clearly this was originally a Valhalla DLC, and through that it essentially just utilizes a lot of systems that Valhalla did, but then obviously modified them to try to make it more in line with older Assassin's Creed. And with that, I think comes a lot of issues. While many people bring this up as, oh, this game's just like Assassin's Creed 1, I really feel like it's almost nothing like Assassin's Creed 1. The game that I personally think this reminisces a bit more is something like Assassin's Creed Unity. I would actually say it probably is like a mix of Assassin's Creed Unity and Assassin's Creed Origins. Like, it very much feels like it's more so picking up where the older school Assassin's Creed style games left off than it actually feeling like an old school Assassin's Creed game. And with that, let's talk about some of the bigger aspects of its gameplay. I mean, obviously parkour is a major aspect of gameplay in Assassin's Creed. That was one of the core fundamentals of the original Assassin's Creed and kind of what made it a unique game at the time. And straight up, parkour in this game is really bad. Now again, is the level design one that does accommodate for parkour, that does definitely help out with it, especially in comparison to the recent entries? Yes. But again, the parkour system itself is just really bad. And to be fair, it has been since Unity, where again, Assassin's Creed is a series where just as time went on, they continuously took away more and more agency from how you're able to navigate around the world. And as much as people seem to love Unity's parkour system, it's actually really bad, as it really gives the player very little agency in how they navigate around the world. And ever since then, with this still being on the same engine as Unity, again, a modified version of it, you could very much tell the fundamentals of that parkour system are still in place. Again, this is essentially just the same parkour system that it was there for Origins, Odyssey, and Valhalla. One where, again, it's just a bit of a mess. There's many points in this game where I'm trying to do something, just bashing on the X button, trying to jump, and it just doesn't jump for most of that time until just all of a sudden it finally does. And there is this like hesitation when you're on the edge of a surface that really slows things down. There's no back ejects. It's hard to side eject. Like, just the way you move through this world is very frustrating. But again, it's essentially just the same system that has been utilized for Origins, Odyssey, and Valhalla. It's not like they changed anything here. It's just that this game is obviously more focused around parkour, where these limitations end up becoming more frustrating just because you're using it more. Though I should say, again, I do like the level design of this game. I do think the streets of Baghdad are pretty fun to parkour around. But again, I think in comparison to the likes of AC's 1 through Revelations, I mean, this parkour system is simply just bad. And again, I know the limitations of them having to use the Valhalla engine, and this again being a Valhalla DLC, but again, I think that's the fundamental issue of making this game to begin with, is that making a true return to form is not really possible with this engine. Which I should mention also the fact that this game's control controls are a bit strange for me, to where the fact that you're supposed to be parkouring while not holding down any button outside the X button just feels strange. So again, I had to change the controls up to make it feel a bit more old school, and just in general, I ended up changing a whole bunch of controls in this game just because a lot of them did feel very bizarre at first, and I was never really able to get the perfect combination. Another integral gameplay system to Assassin's Creed is the stealth system. And in general, stealth in Mirage is good, but again, not old school Assassin's Creed. The actual detection system in this game is mostly solid, with them also returning the notoriety system that, again, I think functions pretty well here. But the actual stealth system is one that, again, people are talking about this as a return to form for Assassin's Creed. I think this is essentially just Ubisoft having gaslit most people into thinking that this is what Assassin's Creed stealth is, where a lot of stealth in this game is focused on sneaking in the forts and crouching around and finding your way through barge doors, and all this, again, is not really old school Assassin's Creed, where, again, the core of old school Assassin's Creed was not around this type of stealth, but more so social stealth, which I think is extremely underwhelming in this game. It feels mostly in line with Valhalla, again, utilized a bit more, where, again, you can blend in with some crowds, you can sit on a bench to blend in, there are obviously places to hide, but it doesn't feel like any of this is really utilized that much in this game, and I really feel like I rarely ever use social stealth effectively in this game. It just really feels like an afterthought, and I feel like that's extremely underwhelming to me. Now, I guess I'll mention the assassin focus system, which straight up I didn't use because I felt like it was stupid, as again, obviously in a return to form to Assassin's Creed, we gotta have the ability to eliminate multiple enemies at once through Basim teleporting, so again, that was stupid, but whatever. But now let's talk about combat, which I think is an interesting case here, in the fact that I hate the combat in this game. I think the combat sucks. It very much feels reminiscent to the combat of Valhalla and Odyssey, it being this relatively quick-paced combat style with no real weight to any of your attacks. You can also pretty easily die. I mean, getting into combat is pretty brutal in this game, but in a way, that's good, as again, the point of Assassin's Creed has always been to try to avoid combat when you could, and you are supposed to utilize the stealth systems to navigate your way, and if you did get into combat, that means that you did something wrong. So I kind of like the fact that I don't like the combat, but also it means that I don't like the combat, and I think a big aspect of that too for me is me really not liking the stamina system that's there, where it just depletes so quickly, and there's many points where I'm just waiting for it to get back up before I can even attack again. I think makes this a pretty frustrating experience, but again, that's kind of the point. But again, it doesn't change the fact that, again, I think combat is pretty bad in this game. I do not enjoy it in the slightest. Something I do actually really like from this game is the tool system. I feel like the tool system in this game is actually pretty cool. I mean, it's probably like one of the better aspects of its gameplay, and the fact that it does allow for a lot of variety in how you approach situations, a lot of different types of upgrades you can use, where each tool is be able to upgrade 3 times, each of which you can add a different ability to it. You can also switch these up, and same thing goes to the skill tree as well, where again, I do like the amount of variety there is there. Though I will say, smoke bombs in particular are extremely overpowered in this. So if you just unleash a fully powered smoke bomb, you can essentially just kill every enemy in the area by assassinating them pretty quickly. But again, the return of throwing knives and blowpipes and the appearance of firecrackers, all these did add a lot of variety to the gameplay that I personally enjoyed. And I guess we should talk about the open world of Baghdad, which again, I think is a pretty great city here. It does very much feel alive, especially when you're in the centermost area of the map. And I do overall like how it is designed. The fact that you do have this central area that is essentially the rich district that's heavily compact, and then you have this outer ring where you spend the majority of the game. That kind of feels in line with the middle districts that you would see in the OG game. Well, then you have the wilderness outside, which I will say I don't love the fact that most of the wilderness is just kind of empty land. That while there are things there, none of it felt particularly interesting. But through that, you do also have Basim's hometown in Ambar, which is essentially the poor district. And I do like having all these different districts that did feel very much in line with AC1. But again, overall, the side activities felt very much in line with recent entries, just a lot less of them, which at least that's something. So again, I 100% completed the game in about 25 hours, which is not that long, which again, you wouldn't expect it to be, considering again, this was originally a Valhalla DLC, but I still feel it's a respectable length. Again, for me, this is around the length I would want a game to be. I feel like the length of Odyssey and Valhalla and even Origins was just extremely bloated, to where thankfully this game is a much more condensed experience. But really, most of the collectibles here are not that interesting. I mean, there are gear chests that give you specific gear and the things you need to upgrade them, which I will say most of the outfits to me did not look particularly great. Now you could override them with costumes, with me using the Master Assassin costume by the end of it. But outside of the initial robes that Basim gets, I didn't personally like a lot of them. But really, most of the other collectibles sadly just lead up to you getting a dumb costume that didn't even look good to begin with. That's really what happens from getting all of the lost books and Dervis's artifacts. Though finding the artifacts is probably the main point in the game where you're going to use the pickpocket system, which again wasn't utilized that much in the game, though it was largely surfaceable. The other collectible ends up being mysterious shards, which ends up leading to you getting the Isu equipment for this game, which most of which wasn't that good and just kind of felt ridiculous. The dagger was pretty good though, where it would charge back up your health after a few hits. Though the big thing here is that you do also get a new set of armor, one that sends a shockwave every time you air assassinate, which was really stupid. Now, like in Valhalla, you do also have these side activities that are kind of side quests but not official ones in Tales from Baghdad, which there aren't that many of them, and really a lot of them are not super notable, but they were fine enough. Probably the best one of the bunch is one of you teaching this kid how to do a leap of faith, with that kid turning out to be Hytham as a character from AC Valhalla, so again, that's kind of cool. Now, there are also side missions in the Assassin contracts, which were also just kind of passable missions. They were largely fine. There were some decent assassinations in them, so at least that's cool, but very much felt like kind of low budget missions there of just escorting a person out of a restricted area or stealing an item for someone. Again, none of these really stuck out, though were fine enough for what they are. Now, I guess I should also mention the token system, where by doing missions, you typically get these tokens that are used to do these things that would typically just be done using money in other Assassin's Creed games, things like lowering your notoriety or recruiting some mercenaries or bribing people for information, which I found, again, to just be a bit of a weird addition. Now, I didn't completely dislike it, but I did feel like it was a pretty superfluous addition. But really, the rest of what I want to talk about, I feel like we can do through running through the main campaign, where, again, like narratively, there isn't that much to say. Straight up, I did not love the narrative of this game. I do feel like the narrative was just kind of boring to me until the very end, where I feel like there were some good moments towards the end, but really early on, it really did nothing for me. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that I just found Basim to be kind of boring in this game. I mean, he's not like offensively bad, to where there are certainly other AC characters that I think are worse characters, but Basim just kind of felt bland. And really, to me, a lot of this game's narrative felt kind of reminiscent to something like AC Origins, though without as good of a protagonist, where AC Origins is a bit of a mess narratively, but at least it has Bayek, who to me is one of the greatest characters in all of Assassin's Creed. And to me, this game is kind of on a similar level, just without Bayek and with Basim, who again is just not as interesting. By the way, the game starts with narration from William Miles, who still doesn't sound like John Delancey, and which also ends up being pretty much the only modern day in the entire game, which is funny as it's literally just a pointless monologue. That's followed up by a scene of Basim having a nightmare, something that is reoccurring across this game, of him being tormented by a genie, you know, just like an old school Assassin's Creed, where again, it's ridiculous to me that the game that is branded upon being the return to form for Assassin's Creed is a game where you're literally playing as the reincarnation of Loki. And Basim's entire development in this game is based around his later acceptance of him being Loki, just like old school Assassin's Creed. And really, again, that's the big thing with me with the narrative of this game, is that very clearly they try to mirror Assassin's Creed 1 later in the story. They have the base plot of, oh, you're trying to rise up the ranks of the assassins and assassinating targets one by one. You spend a lot of time investigating those targets. But to me, it just feels like it all falls flat because the development around the central character is not as interesting, with, again, the entire development of Basim's character here being showing him struggling, finding his place in life and figuring out who he is, which is to me not as interesting of an arc as the redemption that Altair has in the original AC1. But anyway, we then spend the opening section playing as Basim, as he's a street thief alongside his friend Nehal, who is probably one of the better characters in this game. I do think the relationship between the two is one of the more interesting aspects of the narrative, though it's not really saying that much. But I just found Nehal to be just a really strange character, though, as we progress, which is kind of rectified by the end. But her constant appearances in the story that are just kind of unexplained, and her just seemingly knowing what's going on at points where none of that is ever mentioned to her was bizarre, though again it makes sense by the end. And to be fair, I did start to pick up on that and did have an inkling at what was really going on by the end of the game, but initially it just come off as a bit bizarre. But really, Basim's overall arc early on is just kind of generic, of him having grander aspirations and wanting to join the Hidden Ones to fulfill those, where along the way we meet Roshan for the first time, his later mentor, who is again probably another one of the better characters in the game, but again it's not really saying much. And straight up, I really don't care about a lot of the characters in this game. A lot of them just came off super bland to me. Roshan at least came off as kind of cool. At least there's that. I didn't feel like there was that much depth to her, though she at points had some interesting bits of wisdom to pass down. And I do like how she plays into Basim's overall struggle with the Creed later on, but it all leads up to us sneaking into a palace to steal an artifact that the Hidden Ones want. And inside he ends up finding a memory seal, again, an artifact we've seen in the series beforehand, that really I don't understand why they want this outside just the basic concept of being a precursor artifact, as it doesn't really do anything. Obviously everything goes wrong, where Basim gets caught by one of the Order of Ancients members, and the Hall ends up saving him there. But obviously they escape, but when getting back to their hideout, they find out that palace guards had murdered all other thieves in the area, many of which being children that obviously Basim could have interacted with earlier, which and feels a bit melodramatic. This has him blaming the Hall and parting ways before joining the assassin. Kind of just an overly generic backstory there, and one where like the feud between him and the Hall really leads to nothing, as their relationship just gets repaired right away, which again, to be fair, it makes sense by the end of the game, but it's just really funny how like nothing comes of that. Finally, we do spend some time in Alamet, which is the assassin headquarters at the time, which this section largely just felt like a tutorial section. It was just us learning about combat and tools while getting introduced to a whole bunch of characters that I didn't care about, many of which appearing much later on in the story, some of them being bureau leaders, and again, none of them came off as particularly interesting. But really, the main events of the game occur when we learn about the Order gaining a lot more control in the city of Baghdad, to where Basim and Roshan are sent to return to the city to hunt the Order members down, which leads to really the bulk of this game having almost no real plot progression, where really all of it is just Basim doing investigations and taking down Order members, which I mean does feel very reminiscent to AC1. But again, I feel like with AC1 there was at least this interesting character development that was going on along the way with Altair and his relationship with Al-Mualim, while I feel like with this game it just didn't feel that impactful, where again it doesn't feel like Basim really grows that much during that short period of time, and his interactions with Roshan were just not as interesting as Al-Mualim's. But again, gameplay-wise, on paper, it does feel very Assassin's Creed. I mean, in many ways, again, this plays out very similarly to how I talked about in the past about what my perfect modern Assassin's Creed game would be. That would be like a modification of the Cult of Cosmos system, and that you would do these missions that would allow you to get clues that makes you find out who the target is, then you would assassinate the target. And again, that is how the system functions here. Again, we have 4 different bureaus in the city, each in a different district of the city, and through doing the missions in that district, you would eventually find out the main Order member that resides there and eventually assassinate them. Again, it is a structure that I do like on paper, and in many ways it does feel like kind of a progression of AC1's, where again these missions aren't as repetitive. Again, isn't literally doing the exact same mission over and over again. I feel like this is kind of close to how you'd handle that system nowadays. Now, I will say I do wish there was a bit more freedom in this. Now, you do get to a point where you can choose which bureau and which storyline you want to do at which time, but I do feel like the missions themselves felt very limited, or most missions had to be completed in a certain way, and the overall assassinations themselves also kind of ended up being a bit underwhelming to me, where a lot of them were pretty linear, of them essentially making you have to use certain opportunity to lure the target out or even sneak to their hideout, which again becomes linear from that point on. Again, it's just kind of an underwhelming aspect of the assassinations in this game to me, where again I did feel like they were mostly limited. And the missions outside that again were mostly unremarkable. I mean, we do have the return of some old school style style missions, like tailing missions, obviously, which were just annoying. And it's funny to me that I feel like they actually made tailing missions worse in this game, where in the OG, if you got detected, okay, they would just restart you from the previous checkpoint. In this game, you would literally have to find a bench, pass time to the same time the next day, and then start all over again from the beginning, which is just really annoying. You do also have eavesdropping missions that return that function similarly to AC1, where you go in a hiding spot and just push a button to listen in. Again, it's fine. I mean, it's really like one of the more boring mission types in Assassin's Creed 1 to bring back, but whatever. A pretty inoffensive addition here. And again, a lot of this section of the game just comes off as largely unremarkable narratively. Now, I feel like there is one specific section with Ali where I think they do some decent stuff there, particularly in these like parallels between Basim and Ali, where they're both similarly minded people, but their approaches are radically different. Where obviously Basim trolls the hidden ones, where he stays in the shadows, while Ali is more out in front and gloats in the killing of his enemies. And I did like that dichotomy there. But eventually, obviously, it all leads up to taking down the leader of the order in Baghdad, where you get a series of missions investigating the potential suspects, which I find kind of dumb, as it makes it very clear that it is one of them in particular, yet despite that, you still have to do the other two only to find out nothing, which is kind of dumb. But the final assassination itself is a pretty big one, where it takes place in the massive palace in the middle of the city and ends up being ridiculously reinforced, to where I did enjoy all the different steps that you need to do to eventually find her. But once we finally do, this is finally where the narrative kind of picks up, where things finally happen again, where it's here where she reveals that she had been looking for him and that he is the key to something that the order wants, and that he'll find his answers in an Isu temple underneath Alamut. However, just as she reveals this, obviously Roshan kills her, warning Basim to not investigate into this any further, which I think is this interesting dynamic between Basim and Roshan. This kind of showing Basim becoming disillusioned with the Creed due to the way that Roshan ends up handling him, with her telling him to ignore his dreams of the genie, despite her knowing exactly what they are, and through that is essentially trying to control him, obviously something that is opposed to the assassin philosophy. And while again, it isn't really emphasized that much in the story, I do like this minor focus on the Creed, even though again it's not really much beyond the surface level. But obviously Basim ends up disobeying her and going to Alamut with Nahal. So once there, we find base having been attacked and occupied by the Order's guards, which we obviously have to tediously kill them and save the mentor, and eventually find our way at the temple entrance, where Roshan ends up attacking Basim. So we're obviously the final boss battle in the game is us having to fight her, which again obviously feels very reminiscent to the battle against Al-Mualim. But again, I don't feel like the stakes were nearly as impactful here. I feel like Al-Mualim actually being an antagonist and doing these more overt things going against the Creed was a lot more impactful than Roshan, who just wasn't telling Basim about him being Loki. And just straight up, I feel like that's the way of most antagonists in this game. I feel like the antagonists in this game were extremely shallow. I feel like they missed out on a lot of what made AC1's antagonists great. The fact that they were these very despicable villains at first, but then you would see through their memory corridors that they actually had reason to their madness, creating this big dichotomy with them, while here the antagonists were just boring and really didn't do much at all. It just felt like we were just going after him just because we were told to, over there being this added purpose to it. But again, obviously we have this boss battle against Roshan, to which we don't end up killing her for some reason, just incapacitating her, while Basim and Nahal end up entering the temple, which inside we see an Isu status pod, which again was really surreal seeing this. Again, reminded me of the endgame of Valhalla, which was just also extremely surreal, and also is just really funny that this is what the assassins have been guarding this entire time. But then through this, we obviously get the big reveal that Nahal wasn't real, and her alongside the genie were essentially these manifestations of his repressed memories as Loki, which again, I kind of saw it coming. I mean, obviously the genie part of it was obvious, but even the Nahal one, I feel like towards the end game, I started to pick up on the fact that no other character was interacting with her and she would just show up at random times. And again, it feels like kind of a generic twist that's been used in other forms of media, of this companion character for the main character actually being a figment of their imagination. But obviously through this, he ends up regaining his memories and becomes the Basim that we know in Valhalla. We're following this, despite him going against orders and going into the temple, he is then then welcome back to the Hidden Ones for some reason, to which Roshan ends up resigning at that. And then we get a humorous moment that I know it has thematic significance here, but I found it funny when Basim's ego goes and scratches him in the face, which obviously signifies the change in him, but I just found it so over the top that was pretty funny. And we end the game with him talking about how he's looking forward to his reunion with those that he felt responsible for his imprisonment, which, whatever. I mean, again, obviously a reference to Valhalla and the ending of that game. Again, just still really dumb that a game that's going back to the roots of Assassin's Creed has the entire ending of its game being revolved around a man finding out he's Loki. But really, I mean, that's most of what I have to say about Assassin's Creed Mirage. I mean, I do think at the end of the day, despite my basic complaints about how this game's engine is not one suited for an Assassin's Creed game that's claiming that it's a return to form, and also its narrative being kind of boring at points, and outside that also being ridiculous in how it feels very opposed to what Assassin's Creed was originally, I still did have fun with this game at points. Again, I do feel like the base gameplay, while again not fully being what Assassin's Creed originally was, is still a fine gameplay loop. I would rather have games like this than the likes of Odyssey and Valhalla. And I feel like if a game was written extremely well to the level of something like a Black Flag, I could definitely see a world where Assassin's Creed could turn around and go back to being okay, I guess. But just straight up, I don't personally care anymore. Again, next year I will be redoing my Assassin's Creed series ranking, and while I might still play the games beyond that, I don't intend on doing individual videos about the new games in the series, and I don't really care to. Like, even with Mirage here, I just really didn't care about a lot of this experience, because I just feel so detached from the series, to where, even though, again, I had fun at points playing this game, it's not one I have any real connection to anymore. I just don't really have this care about where Assassin's Creed is going, or despite them making changes that seem like they're in the right direction, it's still just not changes that I personally care about. But through that, again, Mirage is a fine game. I do think it is one of the better recent Assassin's Creed games, for whatever that's worth. I do think it at least is an attempt to go back to what Assassin's Creed used to be, though really I don't expect that to be the norm for the series moving forward. But with that, again, moving forward, I'll still do that series ranking next year. I still intend on doing my retrospectives for the older Assassin's Creed games. Also, very soon Spider-Man 2 comes out, and I'll probably do a video of that. Also, for anyone that cares about Survivor Castaway Island, I'll probably do a video of that at some point down the road as well, so stay tuned for those. But for now, that is the video. Thank you for watching.